Hey Capricorn, this is your year ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the entire year of 2026. My name is Chris Brennan, and joining me today is astrologer Leisa Schaim. Hey Lisa, thanks for doing horoscopes with me this year.
Hey, Chris, glad to be here.
Yeah, so we would recommend looking at the horoscope that matches your rising sign if you know your birth time. Although, if you don't know your birth time, then you can also look at the one that matches your sun sign. So, we're going to focus on giving a big picture overview of some of the major transits this year. And why don't we just go ahead and jump right into it? So here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. And here's the major transits we're going to be talking about this year, starting with the Saturn Neptune conjunction, which is going to move from the sign of Pisces into the sign of Aries starting in January and February, right at the top of the year. And this is moving from your third house into your fourth house, which is a major shift in terms of slower moving outer planets.
Yeah, so this will alleviate some of the constraint or harder work you may have felt for the last few years in particular around third house topics, such as things involving siblings, cousins, or other extended relatives. It could have been you had a sibling that was having a harder time than usual, or you just had more constraint or strain in your relationship with them during this time. That'll be letting up some. Um, Things involving your neighbors or immediate neighborhood, if you've had any trouble with that, or just communications in general, if you've found it like more laborious to feel like you can it's taking more effort to get across what you're trying to communicate, or for some reason some constraint around feeling like you can communicate easily. All of that's going to be moving on, which is a really good piece of news, and it's moving into a different area. So there'll be a lot less strain around those topics. And Saturn and Neptune are moving into, well, I should say also there will be less nebulousness around those topics too, because that's been a big piece of those planets being co-present in your third house. So they're moving into your fourth house of home, family, parents, living situation, ancestry, where you come from, and things from the past. And so, especially when Saturn and Neptune come together exactly in February, there can be a sense of some structures dissolving that were previously there. And it can also be a time of reimagining what home base is for you. So where do you want to live ideally, whether that's, your specific apartment or house, or whether that's where in the world do you want to be living? Where does home base feel like for you?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes that can bring up some challenges or surmountable difficulties in terms of your home and living situation. If you start running into issues or you realize that a certain living situation is untenable and sort of forces you to move into a different one. So that's one potential in terms of this transit with Saturn going into your fourth house. It can also, though, represent things happening in the lives of your parents or something in terms of your relationship with your parents, reaching an important turning point and maybe being a little bit rockier or a little bit more distant than normal, which itself can be part of an ongoing process of renegotiating the boundaries between the two of you.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's a longer term transit. Saturn will be there for about 2.5 years, and Neptune for much longer. So it's not something you have to figure out immediately, but you will feel a little bit of accentuation around this in February, and it will harken back to when Saturn and Neptune got the closest that they already got in Aries, which was the second half of 2025, and especially in July. In July, they came together within less than a degree. So there should be something similar going on in that area of life for you come February.
Yeah, so I've been calling it over the past year like the peak of the reality distortion field when Saturn and Neptune come together in a conjunction. In this instance, it's happening in your fourth house of home and living situation and parents. And part of the trickiness there is it may be hard to tell the difference between what's real versus what's not real, or what's true versus what's not true. And so it might be really important, especially around February when this conjunction is going exact, to be careful in terms of making final decisions at this time, because you may not have a clear picture really of what's going on, but that will start to improve after February as Saturn and Neptune start to move apart. The only One of the caveats with that is I did a research project a year ago on Saturn Neptune conjunctions, and I did see people doing important things in history on Saturn Neptune conjunction, setting up religious communities or philosophical communities and like specific living situations and things like that. And while I'm not necessarily like recommending you should set up a cult, like I'm just saying if there's some way that there's a constructive like manifestation of setting up a religion or setting up a community situation and bringing into concrete form a living situation that's connected with your ideals, your beliefs, or your religion or spirituality, I could easily see that as being a manifestation of this transit.
Definitely like starting an intentional community type of situation. Um, I should also add, even though it sounds random but very literal, that Neptune transits through the fourth house are notorious for water issues in the home, and especially with Saturn and Neptune coming together, it's just a good thing to pay attention to your literal foundations and water issues surrounding that. I'm not saying that will happen for everyone, but it happens often enough that I'm mentioning it.
Right, definitely. All right, so that's our first transit of the year. Moving on, our next transit is eclipse season. The first eclipse season starts in February and March, and this is going to be taking place in the signs of Aquarius and Virgo, which is your second house of finances and your ninth house of travel and education and beliefs. So this signals a period of major beginnings and major endings when it comes to these topics.
Yeah, so the first eclipse is going to be in Aquarius, which is the first in that series. It'll be the first one we have in the Aquarius Leo series. And that'll bring beginnings and endings, or at least mini chapter beginnings and endings with regard to your personal income and finances, whether that's the source of how you make a living, being like ending one job and starting a new job, or it can be starting the seeds of like future ways you could make a living that are different than how you are now. It can also be beginnings and endings with regard to how you manage your finances and learning more about the financial world and getting more savvy around that, any of those types of topics.
Yeah, this is going to be the first transit of several transits we're going to see activating the financial sector of your chart this year, starting with this first eclipse in Aquarius, but then in your second house of finances and money and possessions, representing some endings, but also some new beginnings with respect to those topics. And then later in the year, we're going to see how that has an interplay with the role that other people's money has in your life, which includes things like partners' finances, but also taxes, loans, and debts, and other things like that as well. So that's the starting point of this. And then the second part of this is the eclipse that takes place in Virgo, which represents major beginnings and major endings with respect to your beliefs and with respect to your outlook on the world, especially, which is primarily what the ninth house relates to. So this could be sometimes the ending can be like completing a course of study or graduating from an educational program. Other times, the new beginning can be starting to learn a new like philosophy or starting a new educational course or starting to even to get into a new religion or something like that at this time. And this is part of an ongoing series of eclipses that started last year. So whatever is happening with this is probably the continuation of something that already began earlier rather than something completely new. But I would pay attention to that idea of major endings and major beginnings.
Yeah, we're kind of in the middle of that eclipse series, or we're sort of towards the end, but there's going to be one more. So you've had two in that same area of life in 2025, and there'll be this one, and then one more in early 2027. So it will be an area of life that you've already had some changes around, but eclipses can bring new beginnings and endings and new chapters, even if you've already had some of that going on. So that can be the beginning or ending of an involvement with a university, for instance, or a course of study. It can be, if you're looking into publishing, that's not going to be relevant for everyone, but that's also a ninth house topic. Could be some sort of like planting the seeds of some sort of publishing project, or just, yes, getting more involved or less involved in a religion or a philosophy, um, or even political beliefs changing.
Yeah, it can also just be about travel. Like a lot of ninth house activities or actions, activations can just be about taking a major trip to a new country, or perhaps if you've already moved or settled in a new country, the process of adapting to that and getting used to your new environment and the different cultural things and other things like that. So we'll come back to the ninth house because there's one more transit later in the year that's going to be relevant to that as well. So the next major transit I want to talk about first, though, is that the planet Uranus is going to depart from the sign of Taurus, where it's been since 2018 and 2019. And in April, it's going to move into the sign of Gemini for good for the next 6 or 7 years. So this is moving from your fifth house of children, of romantic matters, of hobbies and games and fun and pleasures. And Uranus is moving into your sixth house of work and health for a significant transit that will occupy most of the next decade.
Yeah, so you may have had a lot of changes, of a lot of potentially unexpected changes around fifth house topics since 2018, since Uranus went into Taurus and into your fifth house. So that can be changes with regard to the decision whether to have children, like maybe you thought you weren't going to have children and now you have children at the end of the transit, or changes in your children's lives if they're older and you have children. Also changes in just things you do for pleasure, what you consider to be fun and rewarding to do with your free time, hobbies, etc. It can be changes in sexuality. And there's going to be one last little hurrah around that in February, or one accentuation before the transit is up. In February, Uranus stations for the last time in Taurus in your fifth house, and then inner planets trigger that all month. Then it goes into your sixth house until 2033, and that's going to bring new changes and innovation around your work and health. Pets also go in the sixth house. So oftentimes when Uranus transits the sixth house, people have a new or renewed drive for independence with regard to their work. They want either greater independence in the terms of their work, like doing more remote work, for instance, work at home, or they want to work towards self-employment. That's pretty common. It's not that it'll all happen at once, but you'll have this feeling of kind of like new drive for independence in the area of work in particular. And that should have started up a little bit last year in 2025, in the second half of 2025, as Uranus dipped into Gemini, but now it's going to be there for a good long while.
Yeah, there can also be unexpected disruptions in terms of your work, especially involving technology, either that's like disruptive in your work or that you're having to learn in order to leverage. This transit reminds me a lot of how like AI is getting integrated into everything and how it's starting to impact different career fields and different jobs. And especially for the Capricorn rising people, I could see that being part of this story here as Uranus is moving into Gemini and moving into the sixth house of work. And sometimes that being disruptive and like not experienced as a good thing that comes out of nowhere and makes everything different very rapidly and very radically compared to what it was before. But in other instances, there's going to be people that learn how to, as long as they're like flexible and stay on their feet, like how to leverage new technologies to stay ahead of the game. So that may be part of the trick there in terms of figuring that out. And of course, sixth house transits can also relate to health matters. So it's a good time to pay attention to health things. Sometimes there can be like weird or unexpected health things that come up that are hard to figure out because they're kind of like different or like wacky in some way that's like hard to pin down. But again, sometimes things like using technology in order to figure that out and in order to get greater insight into that can be part of what a Uranus transit's about.
Yeah, it can also be just new approaches that you're taking to your health. So whether that's just as simple as like a new exercise routine or new nutritional kind of approaches to things, you realize that you need to eat better, clean up your diet, that kind of thing. It can also, though, be because Uranus is one of the significations is sort of unconventional. You can be getting into like more unconventional approaches or alternative approaches to health maintenance.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so that's setting up a long-term transit that is going to play out all the way through like 2032 or 2033. This is just the initial stages of it. There was that preview last July over the next few months in the middle of 2025. But yeah, lots of long-term changes to pay attention to here starting in April. The next transit we want to move on to talk about is that the planet Jupiter is going to spend the first 6 months of 2026 transiting through the sign of Cancer, but then starting in late June, it's going to move into the sign of Leo for the rest of the year. So this is moving from your seventh house of relationships and indicating growth and expansion and good things, even potentially luck or new relationships in the first half of the year. And then Jupiter's moving into the financial sector of your chart about shared resources, other people's money, inheritance, and other things like that that should represent some positive financial things happening in the second half of the year.
hmm So Jupiter transiting your seventh house is going to be the second half of that transit that started in the middle of 2025. So we have the second half of that transit in the first half of 2026. And it's a time where if you're already in a relationship, there tends to be it tends to be a time of greater positivity, greater warmth, greater emotional sensitivity, with it being Cancer in particular. Um, Sometimes people get into situations where they have they meet new people that are particularly generous to them or particularly positive. One-on-one interactions can happen at this time. Um, and then it's going to move into your eighth house, or I should say also just positive things can be happening for your partner as well if you are partnered during this time.
Like your partner has some sort of positive thing that happens in their life, like a promotion or something like that, or they get lucky at work, and then that leads to like a financial windfall that comes through them.
Definitely. Yeah, so with it moving into the eighth house, like you just said, that can easily be one possible manifestation of that, where something positive is happening with the partner, and then that contributes to the partner's income going up and your shared resources, your shared finances going up. Um, Jupiter going through the eighth can also be a good time if you are looking for financial help with things like applying for grants, loans, scholarships. Those are all eighth house things, and those are more likely to come to you with a Jupiter transit through there, although that's more true for day chart people. If you're born with the sun above the ascendant descendant axis, it can go that way for night chart people too. It's just a little bit more moderated.
Yeah, I definitely think this Jupiter transit in these two houses is going to be the most positive transit this year for the people who are born during the day, whereas the Venus retrograde that we'll talk about in a bit will be the more positive one for people born at night. So good stuff to pay attention to there. The eighth house Jupiter transits can also sometimes be like an inheritance or unexpected financial windfall that comes through things of that nature.
Just other people's money, collective resources.
Sometimes also like investing can be an eighth house thing as well. So that could be a
hmm
good area of exploration also.
Definitely, especially with the eclipses we're going to talk about.
Totally. All right. So, one of the things about that is just before Jupiter changes signs and leaves Cancer, there's this really auspicious Venus-Jupiter conjunction that takes place in Cancer this year, which is actually going to happen in your seventh house of relationships. So that could be really positive in terms of an important relationship turning point taking place at this time in June, basically the June time frame, especially early June. And we actually noticed this because we just finished researching and released our 2026 Electional Astrology report, where we went through and picked out the most fortunate dates during the course of the entirety of 2026, and then packaged them together as a report that people can use in order to plan things over the course of the next year.
Yeah, so basically any important actions you know you need or want to take in 2026 or important projects you want to start, whether that's around your love life or business or home or what have you, if you use these dates and times that we've picked out for you that are the best possible times to start things, you're going to have better odds of successful results.
Yeah. So in the report, we have 28 different dates that we've picked out, as well as electional charts that go with those and different tutorials. And we go through each of the next 12 months and we give kind of a forecast, a detailed forecast of the astrological weather each month and tell you not just which dates to use, but also which dates to avoid. Because sometimes electional astrology is just as much about knowing that there's going to be a Mercury retrograde that starts on this date and not to start something new during that time or what have you than it is like gravitating towards the best dates. So the report includes a video version, an audio version, as well as an extensive PDF write-up of the written report itself, and you can use it for business, love, or pretty much any major life events next year. So we're doing a launch sale for just the first month where it's $49.95, but only until January, and then the price is going to go up to $65 for the rest of 2026. So you can get the report right now at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. All right, so that takes us into the second half of the year in terms of our transit analysis, where the next major thing that happens is we get our second eclipse season taking place in August into early September. And this is going to be a pair of eclipses that take place in the signs of Leo and Pisces, which is going to be your eighth house of shared resources and your third house of communication and short distance travel.
Right. So that first Leo eclipse is going to be the first one in that series, kind of combined with the first Aquarius eclipse we were talking about earlier in the year. So this is the same area of life where Jupiter is going to be transiting the second half of the year, bringing more beneficial energies to the area of shared resources, shared finances, other people's money, taxes, loans, debts, potentially investment. And then the eclipse is going to punctuate that with an important beginning or ending, or possibly both, in one of the at least one of those topics. So that can be that can be part of the Jupiter transit in terms of like your partner suddenly gets a raise, and that happens around the eclipse time. That can be a new interest in investment and a new involvement in that, and like using the stock market, for instance. And you can also be a time where, like I was saying earlier, applying for like grants or scholarships, really good time to do that, or loans. Yeah.
Yeah. So having an eclipse happening in your eighth house, in addition to the Jupiter transit, the Jupiter transit is sort of a generic lucky growth expansion type transit in this financial sector. But having eclipses start to take place here brings an additional weightiness to it, that the events that are happening here are important and impactful in terms of your overall life direction. And even though they might seem not super significant at first, in some instances, they're going to be the start of things that are major and the planting of seeds that are going to grow into these huge trees and like orchards in your life in the future. So, that's especially taking place with respect to like financial matters and shared resources, like some major shifts happening, for example, in a partner's life, or with respect to their finances, or with respect to the topic of other people's money in general. It also brings in some of those themes having to do with like mortality, which can sometimes be more prominent at this time with eclipses in the eighth house. But it's part of this ongoing series that we're going to see play out, not just in 2026, but into 2027, because the eclipses are going to keep bouncing back and forth between your second house of your personal finances and possessions and your eighth house of other people's money and shared resources. So you're going to be seeking balance and going back and forth between those two areas and going to extremes between them, but eventually trying to find a way to level out and sort of meet in the middle.
Yeah, and there can just be kind of a series of changes with respect to both your personal income and finances and how you share your income and finances with other people.
Yeah, and how your income impacts other people, or how other people in your life, how their income impacts your personal resources in very tangible ways. And sometimes focusing more on, let's say, your money-making abilities in one period, like when the second house eclipses are taking place, for example, like earlier in the year, in like February, March, versus other time focusing more on your partner's income and finances during other parts of the year. So that's one possibility. The other thing about this eclipse, though, is it's not just the eighth house eclipse, it's also a third house eclipse. So that's significant in terms of communication, in terms of short distance travel, and in terms of siblings, neighbors, and extended family and relatives, of having major beginnings and major endings there. So, one example of that in terms of communication, but also, let's say, short distance travel, is sometimes when an eclipse happens in the third house, you can have like a vehicle that reaches the end of its life cycle and like breaks down or something, so that you realize you need to get like a new vehicle or a new car at that time, sort of fulfilling that symbolism of a major ending as well as a major beginning.
Yeah, at other times it could be the beginning or ending of an important writing project. That's also third house, or the beginning or ending of something happening in your sibling's life, or your relationship with your sibling. And I like that this is the last eclipse in Pisces in that area after Saturn and Neptune have left that house for you. And so there may be some easing up of whatever that change is, that last important beginning or ending in that area for you. It happens without those heavier energies, without that nebulous energy there.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that. And it is kind of tied in with that Virgo eclipse that happened earlier in the year in the ninth house, which is the place of beliefs. So there may be something about shifts in terms of your belief systems over the past year or two and learning how to communicate that with people in terms of how you have to change the way you communicate to better adapt to what you believe and how that may be part of a learning process. And there may be a learning curve to that at this time. But since this is the final eclipse in Pisces, you sort of finally get the hang of it by this time.
Definitely.
All right. So I think that's good for Eclipse season two. Next, we move on to the Venus retrograde transit that's going to happen in Scorpio and Libra in the October-November timeframe, where Venus is going to go retrograde in your 11th house of friendship and it's going to back up into your 10th house of career, which could indicate some overlap happening between those two separate areas of your life, where suddenly friends and groups and alliances are becoming more important in terms of your career and your overall life direction compared to other times in your life.
Yeah, so Venus retrogrades pretty commonly bring back people from the past, and happening in your 11th house initially of friends, groups, and social networks, that can easily just be old friends coming back into contact with you, coming back into your life for some reason. It can be either just for a moment or, for longer. It can be revisiting your friendships or internally revisiting your friendships or social networks and how they are not working for you at the present time. And then, yes, as you said, linking it with your career and public reputation. For at least some people, that can be sort of revisiting the connections between your social networks or large groups of people or organizations of people or just individual friendships or colleagues and your career. So pretty commonly, for many people at least, they have like professional colleagues, and that's an 11th house topic, and that can be one way that can overlap with your 10th house of career. But yeah, it's a revisiting process of those important relationships and connections and themes.
Yeah, for sure. And to get a preview of what this transit's going to be about, it repeats almost exactly every 8 years. So the last time Venus was retrograde in Scorpio and Libra, this happened in October and November of 2018. So you can think back to that time and think about especially whether there are any overlaps between friends and career or just topics coming up in terms of friends and career at that time that could be relevant again today. Or you can even go back as further than that, like 8 years earlier to October, November of 2010. And that was again another Venus retrograde in the same signs. So sometimes it can directly link events that occurred during those previous periods can somehow come up again in the present.
hmm And sometimes those two houses are connected in the retrograde, and at other times you might find, for instance, for some people, Venus is retrograding in the 11th initially, and it's a time where you want to reconnect with old friends or just, reconnect with people in your social networks in your community that you have kind of not been keeping up with lately. But then it moves back into your 10th house, and then you're like, oh, I actually need to focus on work right now for a while. And then it'll go back forward again through your house of career, and then eventually back direct through your 11th house of friends and groups. So there can be a little bit of a interplay where at different points you are wanting to reconnect socially, but then realizing you need to put more attention to your career and then vice versa going forward.
Yeah, I think for people with night charts, this is going to be probably the most positive transit of the year, though, because it's going to be experienced as like good things happening in those areas. And sometimes there can be positive relationships from our past, like friendships or career relationships that come back into the present and become relevant again suddenly that actually push us forward and help us accomplish new things that we wouldn't have been able to accomplish otherwise. So it'll be like a windfall in some sense. For other people, like especially the day chart people, this transit might not be as important. And sometimes those relationships can come back from the past, but then not necessarily be that significant or groundbreaking. And the point is just to remind you of the past and to bring a brief period of reflection, basically.
Hmm. Right.
All right, so that's the Venus retrograde transit. So the final transit we need to talk about is the Mars retrograde transit that's building up by the end of 2026. And Mars does not go retrograde until early January of 2027. However, it's already slowing down by the last quarter of this year. From about late September forward, Mars starts going through the two signs that it's going to station retrograde in, which are Leo and Virgo. So this is going to be a retrograde in your eighth house of shared resources. Again, bringing up that house once again, and your ninth house of travel and education and beliefs.
Yeah, so it's going to be a time where you're spending much more effort and energy for a prolonged period than usual. Mars transits usually last just 6 weeks through one sign, and we're going to be dealing with this Mars transit through your eighth and ninth house well into the spring of 2026 or 2027. So, initially, that's going to be that same area we've been talking about that has a lot of attention in the second half of 2026 for you, where the Jupiter transit's happening the second half of the year and the eclipse is happening as well. So there's going to be some energy or effort you're putting for some reason towards the area of either shared resources, other people's money, taxes, loans, debts. You may need to clear up some things around those areas. For day chart people, this is going to bring more of a bifurcation of like more potentially more conflict or problems, but also the extremes of positivity as well, with both Mars and Jupiter going through Leo. Whereas for night chart people, it's going to be a time where there's just more extended effort or energy put towards that with fewer extremes in either direction.
Yeah, but this is like the third transit already. We've seen this year in your eighth house of shared resources. For some reason, this area of shared resources and other people's money keeps coming up over and over again this year at different points, but especially in the second half of the year. In this context, it's a little bit more challenging because there is a potential for some strife or separations or obstacles and setbacks that take place in that context at this time, where maybe earlier when you were having like just the Jupiter transit or just the eclipse that was taking place in August and September, you were like rapidly expanding in terms of shared resources at that time and encountering good luck and were being essentially unopposed. But then with this Mars transit, things slow down and things you run into a little bit more obstacles and difficulties in that area, both in the area of shared resources, but also in the area that pertains to travel, education, beliefs, and other things like that. I would be a little careful with this transit for like legal issues involving taxes, debts, inheritance, or other people's money, just because the ninth house connecting to the eighth house can sometimes connect the government or like legal topics and running into obstacles there.
Right. This could also easily bring up, if it's relevant to your stage of life, student loans, um, connecting both the area of like loans, taxes, debt, et cetera, and higher education. And I know
Right.
that's a topic that's important for a lot of people these days. Um, it also can be a time I'm thinking of the eclipses happening in your second and eighth houses, which are both financial houses, but also your source of income in the second house. Together with Uranus transiting your sixth, I can see for some people there may need to be some like juggling or renegotiation of your work situation, which affects your own income, which then affects like how you and your partner, if you have a partner, blend your finances. And there could be some conflict around that. Say if you're having a changing work situation that changes your own income and you need to rely more on other people's, your shared resources. But with Mars going through your eighth as well, it can also be like your partner's suddenly having issues with their income or their money.
Right, for sure. Or the ninth house is a travel house, so it could be like a trip that ends up being more expensive or where there's greater expenditures than expected, where it's connecting the ninth and eighth houses.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a transit that's really just getting started in late 2026 and doesn't really fully intensify and become the most acute until early 2027. But I would just recommend paying attention to some of the things that start to develop in late September forward, just because they could be events and circumstances that seem like they should come and go and not be that significant at first, but then for some reason you end up returning back to them over the course of like 8 or 9 months and having to return to and do over certain things or revisit certain things during the course of that retrograde in the first half of 2027.
Yeah, Mars retrograde periods are, it's always a time where you're spending more time than you initially think you need to on a certain project or area of your life. And so if you pay attention during the last quarter of 2026, you can kind of get some clues as to what types of things you may need to redo or put more work into in the beginning of 2027.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I think that's it. That's the last major transit for 2026. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, those are your major transits, Capricorn, for 2026. So thanks for watching. Again, if you need help planning or looking for good dates to start things next year, check out our 2026 Electional Astrology Report, which again is only on sale for this month until January, and then it goes up to $65, but you can get it on sale now for $49.95 at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. Otherwise, if you want to learn more about our approach to reading charts and to astrology and reading birth charts in particular, check out my Hellenistic astrology course at theastrologyschool.com. All right, good luck in 2026, and we'll see you again next year.